At precisely 3 o'clock, I arrived at Baker Street, but Holmes had not yet returned. The landlady informed me that he had departed shortly after 8 in the morning. I settled by the fire, determined to wait for him, no matter how long it took. My interest in his investigation was already piqued. Although it lacked the grim and peculiar features of the two cases I had previously documented, the case's nature and the high status of his client made it distinct. Beyond the investigation at hand, I found great pleasure in observing Holmes' masterful grasp of situations and his sharp, incisive reasoning. His ability to untangle the most intricate mysteries was fascinating to me. So accustomed was I to his consistent success that the possibility of failure never crossed my mind. It was nearly 4 when the door opened, and a shabby, drunken-looking groom, unkempt and side-whiskered, with an inflamed face and disreputable attire, entered the room. Although familiar with my friend's incredible skills in disguise, it took me 3 looks to confirm it was indeed he. With a nod, he disappeared into the bedroom, returning 5 minutes later, respectably dressed in tweed as usual. He placed his hands in his pockets, stretched his legs out in front of the fire, and laughed heartily for several minutes. Holmes exclaimed with amusement, and after choking and laughing again, had to recline, limp and helpless, in the chair. When I asked what was so amusing, he revealed, "It's quite too funny. I doubt you could ever guess how I spent my morning, or what I ended up doing." I suggested he was likely observing the habits, and perhaps the residence of Miss Irene Adler. Holmes confirmed this, but noted that the sequel was quite unusual. He recounted leaving the house just after 8 in the guise of an out-of-work groom. He described the camaraderie among horsemen and how, by posing as one, he quickly found Briony Lodge. It was a bijou villa, 2 stories high, with a garden at the back, but built up to the road in front. It had a Chubb lock on the door, a large, well-furnished sitting room on the right, with long windows nearly to the floor, and those ludicrous English window fasteners that even a child could open. The passage window could be accessed from the top of the coach-house, but nothing else stood out to him. Holmes then wandered down the street, as expected, finding a mews in a lane running along one garden wall. He lent the ostlers a hand with their horses, receiving in exchange 2 pence, a glass of half and half, 2 fills of shag tobacco, and all the information he could desire about Miss Adler, plus details about 6 other locals he had no interest in, but whose life stories he had to endure. When I inquired about Irene Adler, Holmes informed me that she had turned all the men's heads in the area, being the most charming creature under a bonnet on earth, according to the Serpentine Mews men. She lived quietly, sang at concerts, drove out daily at 5, and returned at 7 sharp for dinner. She rarely went out otherwise, except to sing. She had only one male visitor, who was frequent and significant. He was dark, handsome, and dashing, visiting no less than once a day, often twice. His name was Mr. Godfrey Norton, of the Inner Temple. Holmes highlighted the advantage of cabmen as confidants, noting that they had driven Norton home numerous times and knew all about him. After gathering all the information they had, Holmes resumed walking near Briony Lodge, contemplating his next move. Godfrey Norton was evidently a key figure in the matter. Being a lawyer made it more ominous. Holmes pondered the relationship between Norton and Adler, speculating if she was his client, friend, or mistress. If a client, she likely entrusted him with the photograph. If a mistress, less so. This question determined whether Holmes continued focusing on Briony Lodge or redirected his attention to Norton's chambers in the Temple. It was a delicate issue that broadened his investigation. Apologizing if he was being tedious, Holmes emphasized the importance of understanding his challenges to grasp the situation fully. I assured Holmes of my close attention, and he continued, recounting how he was still pondering the matter when a hansom cab arrived at Briony Lodge, and a gentleman, unmistakably the man he had heard about, emerged. He was remarkably handsome, dark, aquiline, and mustached, and appeared to be in a great hurry. He instructed the cabman to wait, and breezed past the maid with the air of someone at home. The gentleman remained inside for about half an hour, visible through the sitting-room windows, pacing, talking excitedly, and gesturing. Holmes could not see her, but when the gentleman emerged, he looked even more flustered. Pulling a gold watch from his pocket, he instructed the cabman to drive like mad to Gross and Hankey's in Regent Street, then to the Church of St. Monica on the Edgware Road, promising half a guinea if done in 20 minutes. Holmes was debating whether to follow when a neat little landau appeared in the lane, the coachman in disarray. It had barely stopped when she dashed out of the hall door and into it. Holmes only caught a glimpse of her, but noted her beauty. She instructed the coachman to the Church of St. Monica, offering half a sovereign for a 20-minute arrival. Holmes found the situation too good to miss. He was deciding whether to run or hitch a ride on her landau when a cab came through the street. Despite the driver's hesitation at his shabby appearance, Holmes jumped in, instructing the driver to the Church of St. Monica, offering the same incentive. It was 25 minutes to 12, and he knew what was happening. The cab driver sped, faster than ever before, but the others arrived ahead. The cab and landau, with steaming horses, were in front of the church upon Holmes' arrival. He paid the driver and hurried inside, finding it empty except for the couple and a surpliced clergyman, who seemed to be expostulating with them. They were gathered in front of the altar, and Holmes, lounging up the side aisle like an idler, suddenly found himself confronted by the three at the altar, with Godfrey Norton running towards him. Norton, relieved, exclaimed, "Thank God! You'll do. Come." "Come," and Holmes, confused, asked what was happening. Norton urged him, saying they had only 3 minutes, or it wouldn't be legal. Holmes found himself half-dragged to the altar, mumbling responses, and unwittingly assisting in the marriage of Irene Adler, spinster, to Godfrey Norton, bachelor. It was all over quickly, with the groom and bride thanking him and the clergyman beaming. The absurdity made Holmes laugh just then. It appeared there had been some licensing informality, and the clergyman required a witness. Holmes' timely presence saved Norton from seeking a best man on the street. The bride gifted Holmes a sovereign, which he intended to wear on his watch chain as a memento. I remarked on the unexpected turn of events, asking what happened next. Holmes found his plan seriously threatened, as the couple might leave immediately, necessitating prompt action. At the church door, however, they parted ways, he returning to the temple, she to her home. Holmes overheard her say she would drive in the park at 5 as usual. With that, they drove off in different directions, and Holmes set off to make his arrangements. When I inquired about these arrangements, Holmes mentioned needing some cold beef and a glass of beer, as he had been too busy to eat and expected to be busier that evening. He informed me that he would need my cooperation and asked if I minded breaking the law or risking arrest. I assured him I had no qualms in a good cause, and he was confident of my reliability. Holmes said he would explain once Mrs. Turner brought the tray. As he turned eagerly to the simple meal our landlady provided, he discussed the plan, noting that time was short. It was nearly 5, and they needed to be at Briony Lodge by 7 to meet Irene, or rather Madame Adler. When I asked what would happen, Holmes instructed me to leave it to him, as he had already planned the events. He emphasized the importance of non-interference, regardless of the circumstances. When I sought clarification, Holmes explained that I was to be completely neutral, observe him from outside an open window, and at his signal, throw an object into the room while crying "Fire." I confirmed my understanding of his instructions, which involved remaining neutral, getting near the window, watching him, and at the signal, throwing in the object and raising the alarm before waiting for him at the street corner. Holmes found my assurance excellent, and prepared for his new role. Disappearing into his bedroom, he re-emerged as an amiable and simple-minded nonconformist clergyman. With his broad black hat, baggy trousers, white tie, sympathetic smile, and general air of benevolent curiosity, he bore a striking resemblance to Mr. John Harry's. Holmes' transformation was not limited to costume. His expression, manner, and very essence seemed to change with each new role. The stage lost a great actor when he chose to specialize in crime. We departed Baker Street at 6:15, arriving in Serpentine Avenue 10 minutes before 7. It was dusk, and the lamps were being lit as we paced in front of Briony Lodge, awaiting its occupant. The house was just as Holmes had described, though the area was livelier than I expected. Despite being a small street in a quiet neighborhood, it was bustling with activity. A group of shabbily dressed men smoked and laughed in a corner. A scissors grinder tended his wheel. 2 guardsmen flirted with a nurse girl, and several well-dressed young men lounged with cigars. Holmes remarked on how the marriage simplified matters as the photograph became a double-edged weapon. He speculated that Miss Adler would be as opposed to Mr. Godfrey Norton, seeing it as the client was to its exposure to his princess. The question remained, where was the photograph? Holmes doubted she carried it with her due to its cabinet size, making it hard to conceal, and given the king's capability of having her waylaid and searched attempts already made, she likely did not have it on her person. Speculating further, Holmes considered her banker or lawyer as possibilities, but doubted them. Women's natural secrecy led him to believe she would prefer her own guardianship over relying on a businessman, susceptible to indirect or political pressures. She intended to use it soon, so it had to be within her reach. Holmes believed it was in her house. I pointed out the house had been burgled twice, to which Holmes dismissed their incompetence. When I asked how he would find it, he said he wouldn't look, but would have her show him. Though I expressed doubt, Holmes was confident she wouldn't be able to refuse. Just then, the sound of wheels announced the arrival of her carriage, and Holmes urged me to follow his orders precisely. As he spoke, the side lights of a carriage emerged around the avenue's curve. It was a smart little landau that rattled up to Briony Lodge. As it halted, a loafer from the corner rushed to open the door for a tip, but was elbowed aside by another with the same intention. This sparked a fierce quarrel, joined by the guardsman siding with one loafer and the scissors grinder with the other. A blow was struck, and soon the lady, having stepped from her carriage, was surrounded by a melee of flushed and struggling men wielding fists and sticks. Holmes dashed into the fray to protect her, but as he reached her he cried out and fell, blood streaming down his face. At his fall, the guardsmen fled one way, the loungers another, while better-dressed onlookers, who had watched passively, rushed to help the lady and tend the injured man. Irene Adler, standing atop the steps, silhouetted by the hall lights, looked back at the street with concern. She inquired about the injured man's condition, and voices declared him dead, though another shouted he still lived, but might not survive the journey to hospital. A woman praised his bravery, noting the lady's purse and watch would have been stolen if not for him. They were a gang, and a rough one at that. A voice declared he was breathing, but he couldn't remain in the street. They asked if they could bring him inside, and she consented, directing them to a comfortable sofa in the sitting-room. Holmes was solemnly carried into Briony Lodge and laid in the principal room, while I watched through the window. I questioned if Holmes felt compunction for his role, but I felt deeply ashamed conspiring against such a graceful and kind woman. Yet betraying Holmes was unthinkable. I hardened my resolve, readying the smoke rocket from under my coat. After all, we weren't harming her, just preventing her from harming another. Holmes sat up on the couch, motioning for air. A maid hurried to open the window, and as Holmes raised his hand, I tossed the rocket inside, crying, "Fire!" The word ignited a chorus of fire from the crowd, and thick smoke billowed through the room and out the window. I glimpsed rushing figures, and moments later, Holmes' voice assured them it was a false alarm. I slipped through the shouting throng, reaching the street's corner in 10 minutes, relieved to find Holmes's arm in mine, eager to leave the uproar behind. We walked quickly and silently until turning onto a quiet street leading towards the Edgware Road. Holmes complimented my execution, declaring it perfect and assuring me all was well. I asked if he had the photograph, and Holmes replied he knew where it was. I inquired how he learned its location, and Holmes explained it was simple. Everyone in the street was an accomplice, hired for the evening. This I had suspected. Holmes recounted how, during the staged altercation, he used a bit of moist red paint to create a convincing injury, an old trick. He was carried inside, where Irene Adler had no choice but to bring him to the sitting room, the very room he suspected. Holmes explained that when a woman believes her house is on fire, she instinctively rushes to secure her most valued possession. This impulse had proven useful in previous cases, such as the Darlington substitution scandal and the Arnsworth Castle affair. Married women grab their babies. Unmarried ones reach for their jewels. Holmes deduced that nothing in Adler's house was more precious than what they sought. Her reaction to the fire alarm confirmed this. The smoke and shouting unnerved even her, and she rushed to a recess behind a sliding panel above the right bell pull, revealing the photograph. When Holmes declared the alarm false, she replaced it, glanced at the rocket, dashed from the room, and he hadn't seen her since then. Holmes quickly excused himself and left the house, deciding against retrieving the photograph immediately due to the coachman's watchful presence, as impatience could ruin everything. I asked about the next steps, and Holmes stated their quest was nearly complete. He planned to call on Irene Adler with the king the following morning, and invited me to join. They would be shown into the sitting room to wait, but she might find neither them nor the photograph upon her arrival. His Majesty would likely appreciate regaining it personally. When I inquired about the timing of the visit, Holmes scheduled it for 8 in the morning, ensuring a clear opportunity, as she wouldn't be opportunity. Promptness was crucial, as the marriage could significantly alter her life and habits. Holmes intended to wire the king immediately. We reached Baker Street and paused at the door as Holmes searched his pockets for the key. A passerby said, "Good night, Mr. Sherlock Holmes." Several people were on the pavement, but the greeting seemed to come from a slim youth in an ulster who hurried by. Holmes, staring down the dimly lit street, remarked that the voice was familiar, and wondered aloud who it could have been.